Right around the time that I was contemplating all that and really studying it and looking into it, one of the Spider-Man movies came out, and it was a Spider-Man movie that had he was fighting the lizard, and in that you have this character right here who was a good guy. He was a scientist, a doctor. He had lost part of his arm in a combat situation, and he was trying to figure out what is it about lizards. You could cut their tail off, right, and it grows back. What's the genetic code that causes limb regeneration? So he starts experimenting on mice and rats and stuff, cutting their legs off and trying to inject lizard DNA until eventually he gets a code right and the leg grows back. Wow, cool. So he decides to try it on himself. He injects his stump, and sure enough, his limb regenerates, his hand grows back. But he had an unfortunate side effect. He became a giant lizard creature that had only evil continually in his heart and mind. And the whole rest of the movie was about him causing a whole lot of violence for Spider-Man. Now, I'm saying to myself as I'm looking at that, I'm like, Hollywood gets it. They understand it. The church is still, it's a sci-fi theory. No, they're completely clueless. And yet they're getting exactly right. God, how many of you, if you study the Torah, how many of you know that God is against mixture? Even to, what is it? Wool and linen, right? Yeah. Well, you got plant and animal, and he talks a lot about that, especially through the book of Leviticus. He's against the mixture. He created everything to reproduce after its own kind, and he set the kinds up to be very specific. And Paul talks again later. There's a certain flesh for birds and for this and for that. Everything is supposed to be after its own kind. But in the immediate pre-flood world, 120 years, men began to cross those barriers and start to do genetic manipulation, creating hybrids. And the evidence is all over the ancient record. How many of you have seen the carved sculptures and pictures and stuff from ancient, the Greeks with the centaur, the minotaur, satyrs, the Egyptians, people, human bodies, animal heads? It's all over the ancient world. You have animal human hybrids. And I was in, I forgot who it was that was asking if we'd been to Athens. Who asked that question? Zach. Yeah, I'd been to Athens. I've been to Greece twice. And on my second trip, I was really struck by, it seemed like everywhere you looked, and I've been on Mars Hill and been all over the area, walked down there. Paul wasn't kidding when he said they had a God basically for everything, including, let's just make sure we got all the bases covered. Let's have an unknown God represented here too. It seemed like everywhere I looked, I saw the toppled remains of a temple or the remains of a statue of a god or some kind of depiction of an animal hybrid everywhere. And I came home from that trip and I told Sheila, I said, honey, I can't escape this. It's like everywhere I look in the ancient world, you got animal human hybrids. I said, I think they were real. I don't think it was just, mythology. And I was talking with a friend of mine who grew up in Greece, and I kept using the word myth and mythology. And he stopped me at one point. He said, Rob, you keep saying myth and mythology. He said, when I grew up in Greece, we were taught that as history. It was taught to me as history, not mythology. I talked to another guy that I worked for that grew up in Norway. In the course of a conversation, we started talking about trolls and gnomes and different things that you see in the Norse mythology, and he got real serious. He's like, oh, dude, you don't kid around. That stuff's real. Like, when we're only taught that as fantasy mythology here. And so we had this conversation. I think the animal human hybrids were real. She goes, we had a good conversation. And the next morning, she wakes up, goes to the other room, checks her email, and you know how you have like the news feeds, whatever BBC news feed shows up in her email client there. And it said scientists had successfully cloned a sheep with a human heart. And the article went on to say, if we continue to do this, eventually the genes will fuse together and we're going to end up with animal-human hybrid chimeras, and we're going to have all kinds of ethical issues to deal with after that. And I was like, the next morning, you want to talk about confirmation, 2 witnesses, right? And that's what set me on my journey to really start looking into all this stuff, because I think it's very real. And we're seeing it today. Yes, Steve talked about, when Yeshua comes and what it means as it was in the days of Noah. And what he said is true. But the other side of that is what was going on in the days of Noah that led to the corruption of all flesh, that led to men having only evil continually and violence everywhere. And we're doing that exact same thing in laboratories today.